مرحبا. قربت الانتخابات وبلشوا المرشحين يعرضوا برامجهم الانتخابية ويتواصلوا مع الناس. اليوم 23 Republic تواصلت مع Garnett Genuis, who is a conservative politician and also a Deputy Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs. حكينا مع جينيس عن مواضيع كتير بتهمنا إحنا العرب، وأهمها التصريح المؤخراً بيقول إنه في احتمالية نقل السفارة الكندية من تل أبيب للقدس، وحكينا معاه كمان بخصوص العلاقات الكندية السعودية. خليكم معنا. Hello, Mr. Genuis. How are you doing today?
Very well. It's great to be with you.
Oh, thank you. My name is Mary Momani. I'm a presenter and a producer at 23 Republic. It's an Arab community television currently streaming online. I would like to begin to thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak to you today.
My pleasure.
So today I will be asking you questions that concern the Arab Canadian community and Canada's approach to Middle Eastern politics. So the first question is, there's a generic assumption that a conservative government would restrict the flow of immigrants coming from the Middle East or from any Arab background. How would you speak to these concerns?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify, because in an intense competitive political environment, we know that sometimes our political opponents will want to spread fear and negativity that doesn't reflect the reality. So if you look at the reality of the Conservative record, we had very high levels of immigration. We had the highest sustained levels of immigration in the country's history, and that included high levels of refugees, people coming from the Middle East for a variety of reasons. And the approach we've taken is to emphasize legality in the immigration system, to want to have people come through clearly defined legal channels, not the kind of illegal immigration we've seen growing under the Liberals. And I think, frankly, emphasizing legal immigration is more fair to people in the Middle East, in Asia, who aren't in the United States and can't walk across the border. Emphasizing legal immigration is fair, is orderly, is compassionate, and that means looking at the different channels of immigration, and all three of them, the main ones being economic immigration, where people apply on the basis of skills, maybe because they have a job opportunity in place in Canada, having a strong track there. The family reunification stream, where people are sponsored by members of their family to come and reunite the family, and then the refugee stream, where people who are among the world's most vulnerable are able to come here. All three of those streams are important and need to be working well. And again, the emphasis needs to be on legal immigration and ensuring that there's predictability for people. When you have people jumping the line, coming across the border illegally, that is unfair to those that are trying to come the proper way.
Okay, I see. Given that party leader Andrew Scheer said a conservative government would move Canada's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, don't you think that by moving the Canadian embassy to Jerusalem, Canada is basically recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which would overturn 70 years of international consensus and would effectively signal the end of moves to achieve peace between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, again, appreciate the opportunity to explore this question, and it's one that I've had an opportunity to explore personally. I was part of a delegation of the Canada-Palestine Parliamentary Friendship Group that took a trip to the West Bank earlier last year, and it was a good opportunity for me to go and hear the perspectives that were part of that trip. I've also participated in a trip to visit Israel associated with kind of the Israel advocacy group in Canada. So I've appreciated the opportunity to explore both sides of this, and I understand the cultural and historic significance of Jerusalem to multiple communities. Obviously, holy sites there for Jews, for Christians, and for Muslims. But I will say, and maybe agree to disagree with some folks on this point, that Jerusalem is the place where Israel's parliament is, Israel's Supreme Court is, where the administration of government takes place. And that means that by any other standard, if you look at any other country, the place where the headquarters of their administrative apparatus is, that is their capital. And Jerusalem, in that sense, and in I think any other sense, is the capital of Israel. But we would also take the position that this doesn't preclude any aspect of a final status agreement to be made between Israel and Palestine. Our party is very supportive of a two-state solution, and I think any kind of two-state solution would recognize the importance of Jerusalem for both communities, but the reality is that if you say what is a capital is a place where the administrative organs of government are. Jerusalem is Israel's capital, and further, the presence of our embassy in Tel Aviv, as opposed to in Jerusalem, creates a lot of logistical challenges for engagement with Israel's government. It means that anytime our ambassadors or embassy officials are engaging with representatives of the Israeli government, they are going to Jerusalem and then going back to Tel Aviv. So the logistical thing is obviously not the most important point, but if you think, practically, what is the capital and where does that engagement take place? I think Jerusalem is that place. But as a party, we have worked very hard to have constructive relationships with Palestinians, with the Palestinian Authority, and there may be points on which we agree to disagree, but we are committed to supporting the development of a two-state solution. That has been Canada's position. That is our position.
Okay. And how would a Conservative government strike a balance between Canada's economic interest and its pursuit to uphold international human rights, laws, and values?
Mm-hmm. Well, at the center of our foreign policy, I believe, needs to be an emphasis on our fundamental values, on the advancement of freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law, but doing that in a way that is supportive of and in partnership with local people in different countries who are seeking those same objectives. If you look at the situation in many countries in the Middle East, for example, I think we have an opportunity to work constructively with governments to encourage them in a positive direction. Canada has a unique opportunity. We are a country that does not have a colonial history beyond our borders. We don't have the baggage that often comes from being a superpower. Many European countries might have a colonial history in the Middle East, and we don't have that history. So I think we're in a unique position to engage positively in a way that seeks to listen to everybody, and in a way that seeks freedom, democracy, and respect for human rights. We were talking about the last question about the situation of Palestinians. One thing that I would like to see is movement towards democratic elections within Palestinian territories, and I think democratic elections would would create greater opportunities for negotiation of peace, because it would ensure that there was a clear alignment between where the leadership was and the people. And that's not perhaps possible in Gaza in the short term, but certainly in the West Bank. I think democratic elections there. Following the situation in Iran, there's been strong movements of people seeking peace with their neighbors, seeking freedom and democracy, and we'd like to see the advancement of democracy and human rights everywhere. And I think Canada can play a constructive role in bringing that about. I also think, by the way, though, that it's in our strategic and economic interest to put an emphasis on human rights. Right. If people everywhere, regardless of their culture, their faith, know that if they are seeking freedom for themselves, Canada is on their side, I think that's in our interest. I think that's a message that we want to send. But if people feel that, well, they're not sure if we're on their side or if we're on the side of their oppressors, then in the long run, that is not good for our interests.
I would like to conclude with, how would a Conservative government affect or change the Canadian relation with Saudi Arabia?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an important question. Saudi. Well, I think that. Let's be clear. Saudi Arabia has a absolutely abominable human rights record, and we need to do everything we can to move Saudi Arabia, help Saudi Arabia. Help those within Saudi Arabia who are seeking constructive improvements in human rights to do that. The question is often around what the path to those human rights improvements is. I think after the Arab Spring and sort of the failure of the Arab Spring to bear fruit in many cases in democracy, you have huge problems in Libya still. Egypt essentially went back to what it was under Hosni Mubarak. Syria, the problems that are there, but I don't think this should lead us to give up on the idea of supporting the development of democracy. But I think we should recognize a problem, which is that sometimes if you have a long-standing repressive regime and the only well-organized alternative to that regime is sort of on the more extremist side, like in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, then the country the transition process is difficult, right? So how do you address that? Well, I think what we would hope to see is the development of greater space for freedom, for authentic debate, for stronger civil society in the midst of whatever government currently exists, and that the strengthening of civil society establishes the conditions in which, over time, there can be a greater realization of people's fundamental rights, including fundamental rights over choosing who their government is. So, I believe that human rights need to be at the core of our foreign policy. But the question is the difficult question is always how, right? Do we, in a particular case, try to work with the government and encourage them in a kind of partnership kind of way to increase the space for freedom, or do we say actually kind of the aggressive bully pulpit public criticism approach, the disengagement approach is better, or is it somewhere in between? So with Saudi Arabia, I think we need to speak about the reality of their human rights record, as I have here and in other venues. I think we need to kind of take stock of where we are at the time of the next election and afterwards, and say what opportunities and what challenges exist, and we need to say to the government, can we be a partner in human rights improvements with you, or do you just have no interest in that? And I think there was a few years ago maybe more hope in whether MBS was interested in making certain kinds of improvements in terms of Saudi society, and the Khashoggi affair and other more recent events, as I think, as well as the horrific nature of the Yemen conflict. I think a lot of these have led those maybe were more optimistic about the Saudi regime at one time to take a step back a bit. So I think we'll have to see where we are, and so obviously the tensions there are real, but look, I don't think we should be shy about criticizing human rights abuses anywhere, and also I think it's quite clear to me, talking to people from the Middle East, Arabs, other people groups, that their desire is for freedom, for democracy, for their human rights to be protected, and there are some forms of discourse where people want us to buy into this kind of bigotry of low expectations, right? Say, well, democracy could never work there. I mean, I see that as a bigoted sentiment, right? Mm-hmm. I think people are the same everywhere. People want the same things, and that's why we want to extend a hand as part of our foreign policy, extend a hand to all people everywhere who are seeking a recognition of their fundamental human rights, recognizing that that's not an easy process, that's not something that you just push a button and it happens right away, and seeing the challenges that have happened in democratization, that the building up of civil society, of infrastructure that makes democracy work well is a necessary part of the process. But that process, getting there as reasonably and as effectively as possible, should, I think, be our goal.
Okay. All right. Thank you for this great interview.
Thank you very much.